At my daughter's funeral, her hospice nurse pulled me into the parking lot and said, "Frank, I need to show you something before your son-in-law finds out I talked to you." Then she said, "Don't tell Marcus you saw me. Not yet. Just come to my car." When I looked inside that folder, she handed me through the window. My hands went cold in the middle of July. If you're just finding this channel, stick with me, because this one doesn't end where you think it does. Tell me in the comments where you're tuning in from today. And if this is your first time here, go ahead and hit subscribe, because you're going to want to be here for the next one too. My name is Frank Bellamy. I'm 64 years old. I spent almost 4 decades installing and servicing HVAC systems across the Phoenix Valley, and my late wife Carol and I raised one daughter, Renee, who I loved more than my own life. This is her story. I need you to hear it the way I lived it, because some of it still doesn't feel real to me, even now. The service was on a Thursday morning in late April, out at Desert Rose Memorial off Bell Road. The heat had already climbed past 90 by 9 a.m., that dry Phoenix heat that presses down on your shoulders like a hand. I stood in the front row in the same charcoal suit I wore to Carol's funeral 6 years earlier, looking at a casket that held my only child, and I kept waiting for my legs to give out from under me. They never did. Grief doesn't always work the way you expect. Sometimes it just sits on your chest and waits. Renee had died 11 days before that, at 41 years old, after what everyone called a sudden decline from the ovarian cancer she'd been fighting for the better part of a year. Stage 3 when they caught it, aggressive, but she'd been responding to treatment. That's what made it hard to swallow. 2 weeks before she passed, her oncologist had told her the latest scans looked better than expected. And then, almost overnight, she was gone. About 60 people came to say goodbye to her that morning. Co-workers from the elementary school where she taught third grade for 15 years. Old friends from her college days at Arizona State. My brother Walt, who drove up from Tucson at 5 in the morning to be there. And in the front row beside me sat Renee's husband, Marcus, and their teenage daughter, my granddaughter Sophie, who was 16 and had cried so hard the night before that her eyes had barely opened that morning. Marcus held Sophie's hand through the whole service, and from where I sat, he looked like a man completely hollowed out. I remember thinking, at the time, that grief had aged him 10 years in 11 days. About halfway through the service, while the pastor was reading a passage Renee had picked out herself months before she got too sick to plan much of anything, I noticed a woman standing near the back of the chapel, late 30s, dressed simply, hanging near the doorway like she wasn't sure she belonged inside. I recognized her vaguely. She'd been in and out of our house those last few months, one of the hospice nurses from Desert Valley Home Care who'd helped manage Renee's pain medication toward the end. Her name was Priya Anand. She'd always struck me as quiet, careful, the kind of person who chose her words, like she was counting them out. She didn't sit down. She stood by that back door for the entire service, with her hands folded in front of her, watching Marcus more than she was watching the casket. I didn't think much of it in the moment. Grief makes you miss things you'd normally catch in a heartbeat. When the service ended, and everyone started filing out toward the reception hall for coffee and sandwiches, I stepped outside for air, my collar already soaked through with sweat, and that's when I saw Priya standing beside her car in the far corner of the parking lot, watching the doors like she was waiting for someone specific to walk out. When our eyes met, she didn't wave. She just tilted her head, once, toward her car, and started walking that direction herself. Something in my chest went tight, and I found myself following her without deciding to. "Mr. Bellamy," she said. Once we were far enough from the building that no one else could hear us, over the cars pulling out of the lot, I wasn't sure I was going to do this. I could lose my license for what I'm about to tell you, but I watched that woman fight for her life for 10 months, and I am not going to stand here and pretend I didn't see what I saw. "Priya, what are you talking about?" She glanced past my shoulder, back toward the chapel doors, like she was checking whether anyone had followed us out. "Don't tell Marcus you spoke to me today." "Not yet. I mean that, Mr. Bellamy. If he finds out I came to this funeral, let alone that I talked to you, it could put you in a position I don't think you're ready for." My hands had already started shaking by the time she reached into her car and pulled out a manila folder, thin, unmarked, the kind of thing you'd overlook in a stack of paperwork. She held it out to me like it weighed 40 pounds. "What is this?" "Something Renee gave me to hold on to, 3 weeks before she died. She told me if anything happened to her that seemed strange, I should make sure her father saw this, and only her father. She made me promise. I didn't understand why at the time. I do now. I want to back up and explain something about my family, because none of what happened next is going to make sense otherwise. Carol and I built a modest, solid life. I never made big money doing HVAC work, but we owned our house outright in Sun City by the time Carol passed. And after she died, I moved into a smaller place, closer to Renee and Sophie, so I could be near them. Renee married Marcus Whitfield 9 years ago. He worked in commercial insurance, did well for himself, drove a nicer car than I ever had, and for most of those 9 years, I had no complaints about the man. He was attentive to Sophie. He showed up at my birthday every year without fail. I liked him, honestly, right up until I didn't have the luxury of liking him anymore. Money had gotten tight for them the last 2 years, though. Marcus's firm had gone through layoffs, his commissions had dried up, and I knew because Renee told me herself over coffee one Sunday morning that they'd fallen behind on the mortgage twice. She never asked me for help. She was proud that way, just like her mother. But she'd mentioned it, worried out loud about it, the way a daughter does with her father when she isn't really asking for anything except to be heard. When Renee got her diagnosis, Marcus threw himself into caretaking mode in a way that impressed everyone who watched it happen. He took a leave of absence from work. He researched every treatment option. He drove her to every single appointment at the Mayo Clinic in Scottsdale without missing one. Everyone told me how lucky Renee was to have a husband like that. I believed it too, right up until that afternoon in the parking lot. I opened the folder right there, standing between 2 rows of parked cars in 95-degree heat, my funeral suit sticking to my back, and I started reading. Inside was a printed letter, unsigned but clearly in Renee's handwriting on the margins where she'd made notes, along with a small stack of photocopied documents. Priya stood beside me, quiet, letting me read at my own pace, though I could tell from the way she kept glancing toward the parking lot entrance that she wanted this conversation to be short. The letter explained that around the time Renee's oncologist had told her the tumor markers were dropping and her prognosis had improved, she'd overheard Marcus on the phone in the garage, late one night, thinking she was asleep upstairs. She wrote that he'd been talking to someone about a life insurance policy, one she didn't remember signing an increase on, and about how things needed to move faster, not slower. She wrote that she confronted him about it the next morning, and he brushed it off, told her it was just a routine check-in with their financial advisor about restructuring their coverage now that his income had dropped. She wanted to believe him. She said so, right there in her own handwriting. But something about his face when she asked had stayed with her. She started paying closer attention after that. She noticed her pain medication doses at home felt stronger than what hospice had actually prescribed. That some mornings she woke up so foggy she couldn't remember conversations from the night before. And that Marcus had started insisting on managing her medication schedule himself, instead of letting the hospice aide handle it during her visits, which was not how they'd originally set things up. "There's more?" Priya said quietly, watching my face while I read. Renee started keeping a log. Dates, times, how she felt after Marcus gave her the medication versus after I gave it to her during my visits. She showed it to me about a month before she passed and asked me not to say anything to anyone, including her own doctor, because she said if she was wrong, she didn't want to blow up her marriage over a suspicion while she was fighting for her life. She said, and I remember this exactly, she said, if I'm wrong, I don't want Sophie to lose her father too. I felt something crack open behind my ribs standing in that parking lot. Why didn't she come to me? I asked her that. She said she didn't want to put that weight on you while you were already terrified of losing her. She said, if it turned out to be nothing, she never wanted you to look at Marcus differently for the rest of your life over a mistake. That single detail is the thing that broke me more than anything else in that folder. My daughter had been protecting me right up until the moment she couldn't protect herself anymore. The last page in the folder was a printed screenshot, a text message exchange Renee had apparently found on their shared family iPad, the one Sophie used for schoolwork that also synced messages from Marcus's second phone line for work. The exchange was between Marcus and a contact saved as Ray, adjuster, dated 5 weeks before Renee died. Marcus had written, "The policy bumped up to 1.2 million back in February. Should clear without issues given the diagnosis. Are we still good on timing?" The reply read, "Timing's fine on our end. Just don't let it look rushed. Natural progression reads clean. Anything sudden gets a second look from underwriting." I read that exchange 4 times standing in that parking lot before the words actually landed the way they should have the first time. Priya put a hand on my arm. "Mr. Bellamy, I want to be very clear with you. I am not a detective. I don't know for certain what that message means, but I watched Renee's condition change faster than her scans should have predicted. And I have seen enough patients in 14 years of hospice work to know the difference between a natural decline and something else. I filed an internal concern with my agency the week before she died. Nothing came of it because I had no proof, just instinct. When she died 11 days ago, I requested her case be flagged for review. That review is still open. But I couldn't sit at that service today and watch you shake that man's hand at the reception like nothing was wrong, not without giving you the chance to know what I know. What do I do with this? My voice came out smaller than I intended. You don't confront him. Not yet. Not with just this. If I'm right about what kind of man we're dealing with, and if that policy is really worth what that message says it's worth, then a grieving father showing up with accusations is going to get buried under lawyers before you finish your first sentence. You need someone who knows how to build this the right way. I have a name for you. A retired detective who consults privately now does this kind of work quietly. His name is Ellis Marsh. I already called him this morning before the service. He's expecting you to call today. I got back in my truck that afternoon, a white 2017 Ram with just over 100,000 miles on it, still wearing my funeral suit. My daughter not even a day in the ground yet. And I sat in that hot parking lot for almost 20 minutes before I could make my hands steady enough to dial the number Priya had given me. Ellis Marsh met me 2 days later at a coffee shop off Camelback Road. A broad-shouldered man in his late 50s with reading glasses pushed up on his forehead and the unhurried way of talking that comes from 22 years working homicide before he went private. I told him everything. He listened without interrupting once, which I came to learn was just how the man operated, taking it all in before he ever offered an opinion. Here's where we stand, he said finally, turning his coffee cup slowly on the table. What you've got is suspicious. It's not proof. A recorded conversation between a husband and an insurance adjuster about timing on a payout, on its own, a good lawyer explains that away in about 30 seconds. We need 3 things. We need the actual pharmacy and hospice records to see if medication was diverted or doses were altered outside of what was prescribed. We need a forensic financial look at that policy, when it was increased, who requested the increase, and whether Renee actually authorized it, or whether her signature was forged. Same as the paperwork trick I've seen in cases like this before. And we need Marcus talking, on his own, when he thinks nobody's listening. How do we get that? You let him grieve around you. You stay close. People who've done something they're trying to get away with, they get comfortable fast once they think the danger's past. Especially around family they don't think is paying attention. You're a heartbroken father-in-law. Nobody expects you to be paying attention. That week, I did something that still turns my stomach to think about. I called Marcus and told him I wanted to help however I could with Sophie, with the house, with anything he needed, and could I maybe come stay in the guest room for a couple weeks so Sophie had family close by while she grieved. He said yes immediately, grateful even. Told me it would mean a lot to Sophie to have her grandfather around. I packed a bag and moved into the house where my daughter had died 11 days earlier, and every single night for the 2 weeks that followed, I sat across the dinner table from the man Ellis Marsh believed had murdered my daughter, and I asked him how he was holding up. Ellis had a contact quietly review the pharmacy fill records within the first week. What came back confirmed part of what Renee had written in her log. There had been 2 early refills on her strongest pain medication in the 6 weeks before she died, both requested by Marcus directly with the home hospice pharmacy, both flagged internally as caregiver-managed adjustment, a category that required no additional physician sign-off under their protocol at the time. It wasn't proof of harm on its own. It was proof that Marcus had far more access and control over her medication than a grieving husband typically needed. The financial piece came back worse. The policy increase from $400,000 to $1.2 million had been processed 9 weeks before Renee's diagnosis was confirmed, not after, which on the surface looked almost innocent, except Ellis's forensic contact found that the signature authorizing the increase didn't match 3 other verified samples of Renee's signature from the same time period. It was close enough to pass a quick glance, not close enough to survive an actual forensic comparison. I remember sitting in Ellis's small office off Thomas Road when he showed me that comparison, the 2 signatures side by side on his monitor, and feeling my whole body go numb from the neck down. My daughter hadn't signed away her own life insurance increase. Someone had signed it for her. There's one more piece, Ellis said. The medical examiner's report from her passing listed cause of death as complications from advanced ovarian cancer, which, given her diagnosis, nobody questioned. No toxicology was run because there was no reason to suspect anything beyond the disease she was already fighting. If we want a real answer, We need to request an exhumation and a full toxicology screen. That's not a small thing to ask of you, Frank. I need you to be sure before we go down that road. I thought about Sophie, 16 years old, already having lost her mother, about to potentially lose her understanding of who her father was, too. And then I thought about Renee, writing that letter in secret, hiding it with a nurse she barely knew because she was more afraid of being wrong about the man she loved than she was afraid of dying. I owed her the truth, whatever it cost, the rest of us. Do it, I said. It took 11 more days, living in that house, watching Marcus tuck Sophie in at night with what looked infuriatingly like real tenderness. Before the exhumation order came through and the toxicology results landed on Ellis's desk, they found elevated levels of a sedative in Renee's system, inconsistent with her documented prescriptions in her final 2 weeks. A drug that, in combination with her existing pain medication regimen, would have suppressed her breathing and heart rate in a way that could easily be mistaken for the natural progression of a terminal illness, especially in a patient everyone already expected to decline. Ellis called it what it was. This isn't circumstantial anymore, Frank. This is a case. We decided to move on the day the life insurance claim was scheduled to be processed, 6 weeks after the funeral, because Ellis said Marcus would be at his most confident, his most careless, right before he believed the money was finally about to land. Renee's estate attorney, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Diane Castellano, who had handled Renee and Marcus's will years earlier, agreed to schedule what Marcus believed was a routine final meeting to formalize distribution of Renee's estate. What Marcus didn't know was that Ellis Marsh would be in the room next door, and that 2 detectives from Phoenix PD's Financial Crimes Unit, brought in after Ellis handed over everything we'd gathered, would be parked outside, waiting on a signal. I spent that final week the same way I'd spent every week before it, quiet, present, letting Marcus believe I was simply a broken old man clinging to whatever family he had left. He hugged me the morning of that meeting and told me he didn't know how he'd have made it through the last 6 weeks without me there for Sophie. I let him hold on to me for exactly as long as that hug lasted, thinking about a signature on a policy my daughter never signed, and feeling nothing but cold, patient resolve. We sat down in Diane Castellano's conference room at 10 in the morning. Marcus wore a navy suit, calm, almost relaxed, the posture of a man who believed the hardest part of his year was already behind him. Diane went through the standard opening, the formalities of estate distribution, and then, exactly as we'd planned, she turned to me and asked if there was anything I wanted to say before continuing. There is, I said, and I watched something flicker across Marcus's face for the first time in 6 weeks, the smallest crack in that calm. Before we finish this meeting, I think everyone in this room deserves to know what Renee left behind. I nodded toward the door. Ellis Marsh walked in first, laptop in hand, followed by a detective named Grace Oyelleran, whose badge Marcus stared at like he was trying to remember how to breathe. Frank, what is this? Marcus said, his voice climbing half an octave. This is Renee, I said. This is exactly what this is. Ellis set the laptop on the table and played the pharmacy records first, then the signature comparison, side by side on the screen, and finally the text exchange with the man saved as Ray, adjuster, Marcus's own words filling that quiet conference room. Timing's fine on our end. Natural progression reads clean. Marcus's face went through 3 different colors before he finally spoke, and when he did, his voice had lost every ounce of the composure he'd worn, like armor for 6 straight weeks. That's not your twisting that. That's about the funeral timeline. That's not what you think it is. Sit down, Mr. Whitfield, Detective Oyelleran said, stepping forward and setting her badge flat on the table. There's a toxicology report from an exhumation ordered 3 weeks ago that says otherwise. Anything you say from this point forward can and will be used against you. Marcus didn't sit. He stood there, gripping the back of his chair with both hands, staring at that screen like it might change what it said if he looked at it long enough. And then, quietly, almost to himself, he said the words, "I will hear for the rest of my life." I just needed more time before the debt collectors came. I never meant for it to happen that fast. I swear to God, Frank, I never meant for it to happen that fast. I felt Ellis's hand land steady on my shoulder, because for 1 second the whole room tilted sideways, and all I could see was Renee in that hospital bed, thinner than I'd ever seen my little girl, telling me 2 weeks before she died that the scans looked better, that she thought she might actually beat this thing. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't have it in me to raise my voice. My daughter spent 41 years believing the best in people, I said. She spent the last 3 weeks of her life protecting you from her own father's suspicion because she didn't want to be wrong about you. And you spent that same 3 weeks calculating how fast a payout could clear underwriting. The detectives took him out 4 minutes later. He didn't fight it. He just kept saying Sophie's name over and over, like it was the only word he had left. It's been almost 7 months now since that morning in Diane Castellano's office. Marcus was charged with first-degree murder, insurance fraud, and forgery. He took a plea deal in exchange for a reduced sentence rather than face trial, and he's currently serving 22 years at the Arizona State Prison Complex in Florence. The insurance company voided the policy entirely once the fraud was confirmed and froze the increased portion pending the criminal case. Though the original coverage amount is still working its way through probate for Sophie's benefit, held in trust until she's 25, exactly the way Renee's original will intended before anyone tampered with anything. Sophie lives with me now, in the house I bought for us both in Sun City after everything settled, close enough to her school that she didn't have to change districts in the middle of her junior year, which mattered more to her than I expected it to. Some nights are still hard for her, understandably. She lost her mother and, in every way that counts, her father, within the same 6 months. But she's seeing a good therapist twice a week, and last month she told me, for the first time since all of this happened, that she felt like she could breathe again without it hurting. Priya Anand and I still talk from time to time. She left hospice work about 4 months ago, said she couldn't do it anymore after everything that happened, but she started volunteering with a nonprofit here in Phoenix that helps families recognize signs of elder and patient medical exploitation, and I've started speaking alongside her at a few of their community sessions, telling Renee's story to rooms full of strangers who need to hear it. It's not something I ever expected to be doing at 64 years old, but Renee spent her whole career teaching other people's children, and it feels right, somehow, to spend whatever years I have left teaching other people's families to see what she couldn't say out loud in time. I set up a small memorial scholarship in her name through her old school district for teachers pursuing advanced certification, the kind of thing she always talked about doing herself, but never had the time or money to chase. It's modest right now. It's growing. Every name that gets attached to it carries a piece of her forward, doing exactly the kind of good she spent her whole life doing, without ever asking for credit. I think about that parking lot a lot. Priya's voice, steady, even though I could tell she was terrified of what she was about to do. That folder that felt like it weighed 40 pounds in my hands under a 100-degree Arizona sun. My daughter, so afraid of being wrong about the man she loved that she protected both of us, right up until the moment she no longer could. She trusted me with the truth in the end, even when she was too scared to trust herself with it, while she was still alive to tell it. I intend to spend whatever time I have left making sure that trust meant something. If this story stayed with you the way it stayed with me, go ahead and hit that like button. Tell me in the comments what you would have done in my shoes. And if you want more real stories like Renee's, stick around and subscribe. I'll see you in the next one.